for early stage startups. So early stage startups, basically startups in their bootstrapping Series A stage. And these are key structures that are indispensable and are very fundamental, and I dare say can be likened to what breathing is to every human. So during the course of this session, we'll be going through the following foundational legal documents that early stage startups must have, corporate governance practices they must have in place, due diligence processes, and there'll also be a segment for question and answers. Now, legal foundations, why is it essential for startups? Why legal foundations? Now, a study carried out at Harvard Business School, which was also published in Forbes magazine, stated that 90% of startups fail. Now, this statistic is out there. Legal foundations, the legal framework for any startup shouldn't be the reason why your startup should fold, why your startup should fail. And having a legal framework in place, it helps to build trust, confidence, and credibility with investors. I mean, as an early stage startup, you're trying to gain traction, you're trying to raise funding, attract angel investors, venture capitalists, or even participate in accelerator programs. And so when your legal foundation, when you have a rock solid legal framework in place, it helps to build trust, confidence, and credibility with these investors. It also protects you as a founder, protects your interests, and also protects your intellectual property. It also helps with funding and helps you to grow, helps you to scale. And so this goes without, I mean, it's a no-brainer. And it's non-negotiable. Your legal foundations should not be taken lightly as an early stage startup. And there are some key and fundamental documents that you must have in place as an early stage startup. The first being your certificate of incorporation. Now, this simply says that you must be registered with the regulatory authority in whatever jurisdiction that you intend to begin your processes in. And one of the key documents that is given after registration is your certificate of incorporation. Over here in Nigeria, you also have your memorandum and articles of association. In some jurisdiction, you have your bylaws, which basically states the objects and some other key clauses that regulates and governs your enterprise, your startup. There's also the founders agreement. Now, as a founder, it is very, very, very crucial and very, very important that you have this in place. Agreements with your co-founder shouldn't just be stated orally. They must be documented, and there are key clauses which must be included in this agreement to protect your interest and also to protect your startup. The founders agreement basically outlines the roles, equity splits, that's the shareholding distribution between the co-founders, dispute resolution clauses, IP assignment. I noted that the previous speaker elaborated on that, and I was happy she made mention of that. The time commitment that would be required from each founder, the roles, who is the CEO, who is the CFO, or the CTO, as the case may be. So the founders agreement is very, very crucial and fundamental as an early stage startup. There's also the shareholders agreement. The shareholders agreement basically governs shareholder rights and shareholder obligations, and it also binds subsequent shareholders who become part of the company. So it is important that you have a shareholders agreement in place. At the initial point, the founders agreement can incorporate some terms in the shareholders agreement, but as the startup begins to grow, it is important that a shareholders agreement is put in place, which has its own distinct clauses that would bind subsequent shareholders that become part of the organization, the startup. There's also the capitalization table. So basically your cap table, it shows the shareholding distribution and basically states who owns what percentage of the company. your cap table must be regularly updated, especially when there is a new equity issuance. So perhaps an investor has come in and the agreement in place is a convertible note or a saved note, or perhaps there's a share transfer or a share repurchase, or even when the valuation of the company changes. The cap table must be regularly updated. So it is important that you have a capitalization table in place. Then there's also the intellectual property assignment, which must be in place as an early stage startup. So the IP assignment basic agreement basically assigns intellectual property created by founders to the company. And this is important because every work which is created, if, for instance, there is a dispute and a founder exits the company, whatever he has created, if it is not transferred, if ownership is not transferred to the company, the founder lives with whatever he has created. Now, this includes creative expressions, that's copyright, trademarks, brand identifiers like the words, logos, slogans that are associated with the startup, inventions, patent rights and the likes. So it's very important that an intellectual property assignment agreement is in place. Then there's also employment contracts. Whether you have full-time workers or whether you have contractors or consultants, it is important that you have this employment contract in place. It basically formalizes the roles of the team members and has clauses which helps to regulate, their relationship with your organization. So these are 7 key documents which I believe are key and are fundamental, and every early stage startup should have this in place. Okay, I just touched on this, so the certificate of incorporation, and as stated here, it is a legal document that evinces the company creation, and these are details which are usually stated on the certificate of incorporation. More details may be stated based on the relevant jurisdiction. Then we have the founders agreement, which defines the roles and responsibilities of founders, have the shareholders agreement, and the others which I just touched on. Now we will proceed to corporate governance basics. Now, as an early stage startup, it is important that you begin to incorporate some practices which will help to guide how your startup as a company, as an organization is run. First of which is having systems and rules for managing your startup. Now, it is very important that there are internal rules, bylaws that helps to guide the practices within the organization and basically how the company is run. It's also very important that the startup has a board of directors. At the initial stage, it suffices that the co-founders are the directors of the company. But as the company grows, more persons can be introduced to the board of directors, to the board rather, to direct the affairs of the company. There's also compliance statutory filings. There are different filings based on the jurisdiction that a startup is operational. There are annual filings. There are filings that should be made when there are changes to the structure, management of the startup, their tax filings. It's very important that, compliance is very broad. It's a subject on its own, a total wholesome topic on its own. So there are lots of statutory filings that should be made based on whatever jurisdiction that the startup is operational. So it's important that this is complied with. Then there's also the conflict of interest policies and record keeping. For one, it is very important as an early stage startup, it is easy to lose track of decisions that are being made, especially when those decisions are made orally. So it's very important that records are kept. How are these records kept? Resolutions should be decisions that are passed should be made via resolutions, board resolutions. You should have, these records kept. You should have your registers of shareholding, registers of directors, register of shareholders. You should have them in place. Then you should also have conflict of interest policies in check. Now, it's very possible, I would use that word, that a director on the board or even an employee might have personal interests that might influence decisions or steps that they take within the organization. So it's very important that there are disclosure requirements within the organization, basically prompting the members of the team to make disclosures of any conflict of interest. For instance, a co-founder may want to award a contract to a company owned by their sibling. That's a conflict of interest. An employee might want to start a business, a side hustle, which would infringe on their time or the resources of the company. It's a conflict of interest. So there are different examples that can be posed. So it's very important that, you have a conflict of interest policy in place. So now we proceed to look at recommended governance practices within the startup, within the organization. One, it is very important to hold regular board meetings with minutes. Earlier stated that even if you do not have a broad number of members on your board, you can have the board meetings with just co-founders. It still suffices. You document whatever decisions, whatever steps are being made, and you also document it with minutes, and then you keep it in your records. Now, maintain organized data rooms. You can have, it is in this day and age, it is advisable that you have cloud-based storage where documents are kept and are stored. Then there's also defined decision-making authority that the board usually makes the decisions within the organization. Then assign compliance lead or legal contact. Now, this is very important because most early stage startups, in a bid to minimize costs, they usually overlook legal contact, having a lawyer on board, having someone who heads compliance, ensuring that they are compliant with whatever requirements from regulators in the jurisdiction that they are operational. So it is really very important. Even if you cannot, at that point in time, you cannot fund having an on-site or bringing a lawyer on board, you can have one who you regularly confer with based on consultancy, and you just have put in provisions in respect of that. So it's very important that a compliance lead or a legal contact is brought on board as an early stage startup. Moving forward, now we'll be looking at navigating due diligence. Now, when preparing for fundraising, when trying to attract investors who are coming in to invest into your startup, as an early stage startup, you would go through due diligence process. So basically, the investor here is trying to ascertain that they're not throwing their funds away, they're not pouring their funds into a basket. They're trying to ascertain that the funds they are bringing into your organization is going to be used for the purpose it's being used for. And here, as stated on your screen on the slide, investors review key documents before funding. And these key documents include the certificate of incorporation and the governance documents. They're also looking at your evidence of intellectual property ownership, trying to ascertain that ownership of any IP work belongs to the company and not individuals within the company. And they're also going to be looking at your employee contractor or contractor agreements, looking at clauses, looking at ESOP that you have given out to employees, basically trying to ensure that all terms there are not detrimental to their interest. They're also going to be going through your financial record, your regulatory compliance record. So you want to ensure that your filings are done and that you have your records of such filings in place. So it's as an early stage startup, you need to, as an early stage startup trying to attract funding, attract investors, it is very, very important that you have these documents in check. It's also very important that you are always ready for the due diligence process, and that it is not when an investor comes in and they're requesting to see, your foundational documents, you begin to run around because you do not have them in place. So it's important that these documents are kept in place. Now, some common mistakes which I have identified that startups make. Number one, which is informal agreements with team members. As I earlier stated, it is very, very crucial and very important that you document whatever agreement, whatever decisions that you make with your team members, be it with your co-founder, be it with employees that you bring on board. Your IP work created by, be it your co-founder or employees you bring on board, ensure there's an IP assignment agreement in place, ensure there's a co-founders agreement in place, ensure there's the employment contract with employees in place with consultancy agreements. Basically, ensure that every decision you make is documented, every agreement is documented, and do not just make informal agreements, oral agreements. It will be very detrimental. Also, the second we have here is equity vesting schedules. So vesting schedule basically states when ownership will vest to co-founders. Now, I earlier mentioned the issue sometimes with not having an IP assignment agreement, wherein if a founder exits, whatever work, creative work that they have, that they did or they effected during dependency of their relationship with the company, they could exit with it, and the company would not, it would place the company in a detrimental state. So the same thing applies here, equity vesting schedules. Now, when you, as an early stage startup, you do not have an equity vesting schedule, if a co-founder exits the company, the equity vesting schedule basically provides that provides for when ownership of the company would, whatever shares that they have in the company, the equity vesting schedule basically states when the ownership would accrue to them. So if there's no equity vesting schedule, it could be detrimental. So if it also helps to ensure that founders are compliant in terms of meeting up to their responsibilities and their obligation to the company. So you could have a 4-year vesting schedule with a 1-year cliff. It basically states that after 1 year, the shares they have would vest to them, which means whatever shares, they would now become owners of the shares. So it's very important that an equity vesting schedule is in place. It can be included in the founders agreement. The third we have here is undefined intellectual property ownership and assignment. So this just goes back to the point which I earlier raised about having an IP assignment agreement in place. So ensure that every intellectual work which is created, ownership is passed to the company. The fourth here is using free agreement templates without customization. In this day and age, it's very easy to access agreements, access documents from different platforms online. Now, as a founder who is not, obviously you are not a lawyer and you are not quite conversant with the terms, clauses in this agreement, it's very easy for you to just adopt these agreements without understanding fully the clauses which are included in them. So every agreement, based on the peculiarities involved in that scenario, has clauses which define and regulate, such relationships, such engagement. So it's one very big mistake founders could make as an early stage startup is just using agreements online without customizing it, without ensuring that it is tailored to the needs of that peculiar scenario. So I earlier touched on the need for having a legal on board, either fully or uh, bringing a legal on board as a consultant. So ideally, your legal should be in charge of your agreement, helping to vet, helping to review, helping to draft, helping to ensure that whatever agreement that is in place is tailored to the peculiarities of that engagement. And what's the way forward? Firstly, which is a non-negotiable, is investing in a legal structure early. So as an early stage startup, whether you are the bootstrapping stage, whether you are the Series A stage, ensure you have a legal on board. If you cannot afford to have a lawyer on board full time, you could have them by the side as a consultant. And so you reach out to them to ask them questions on decisions you're about to take, on steps you're about to take, have them guide you. It is very important, it is very crucial. Also, maintain good records. I earlier stated the need for having a cloud database where you upload your records, upload documents, ensuring that you have all this on board, especially when especially when investors want to come in, especially when you're entering your fundraising phase and the due diligence process is about to kickstart, and you have these investors asking for your records, they want to go through your books. So it's very, very important and crucial that you maintain good records. Always, the third is always be due diligence ready. Basically, as an early stage startup, you're trying to scale, you're trying to grow, and you definitely need funds to grow. And so investors are coming, investors are asking for your book. So always be due diligence ready. Make sure you're compliant with regulatory requirements, with your filings, ensure your books are in place and your books are in order. Then the fourth is keep governance light but compliant. It is very important that you have your corporate governance practices in place, but ensure they are light. Ensure that you do not have too many bureaucratic processes on board, because when you have a lot of bureaucracy, especially as an early stage startup, it makes decision making very slow. So ensure you keep your governance practices light, not too light, because if they are too light, then there's a tendency that you'd now encounter legal risk. So just ensure you strike a balance, but ensure that you keep your governance practices light and avoid bureaucratic procedures. Okay, so we have come to the end of this session, and I'm certain we would have time for questions and answers. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening in. Hi, Panache.
Hi, Inikpi.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. I can hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for the brilliant presentation. I think one of the misnomers that a lot of people have is the fact that early stage startups should be focusing on building fast and breaking things, and that they should neglect compliance and legal matters until such a time where they are in a position to dedicate a large amount of resources to do so. But I think you and Utwak's presentations have greatly illuminated the fact that at any level, startups should be focused on ensuring sound compliance and legal sound compliance and legal compliance.